I recognize the member for Eglinton-Lawrence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading of Bill 141, an act to require research to be undertaken and programs to be developed for pregnancy loss and infant death, and to proclaim October 15th as Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Day.
Mr. Colle has moved third reading of Bill 141, an act to require research to be undertaken and programs to be delivered for pregnancy loss and infant death, and to proclaim October 15th as Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Day. Member for Eglinton-Lawrence has the floor to lead off the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my remarks, I'd like to welcome my two daughters are here, my daughter Bianca, my daughter Kristen, my wife Sharon, my grandchildren Poppy, my granddaughter Olivia, my granddaughter Lucia. Welcome to Queen's Park. Mr. Speaker, I've spoken to this before in the second reading, and Bill 141, as I mentioned before, is a bill that tries to break the wall of silence that surrounds pregnancy and infant loss. Every year in Ontario, thousands of women lose their children through miscarriage, through stillbirths, and immediately after birth, neonatal birth. That's thousands of women in all of our ridings, in all of our cities. Women go through living hell when they lose their children they've been carrying, and there's no one around to help them. They can't go to their families because it's something you don't talk about. Many doctors, many nurses, many hospitals do not have the training, the resources, the know-how to help these mothers that go through the loss of an infant. In many cases, the facilities that treat mothers that are successful in a birth are state-of-the-art. There's the best of care in hospitals if you're successful in having a wonderful baby. But if you're not successful and the baby dies through stillbirth or through miscarriage, essentially many of the hospital staff, many of the people who are supposed to provide you the best of health care are not trained to help you. They, in many cases, don't even give you the privacy of a room, because sometimes you're in the same room or next door to where there's babies crying and successful celebrations happening, yet you're alone on a bed with nobody to help you, and all they sometimes say to you is, well, too bad, try again. You're young, you can have more. This is part of the insensitivity that occurs towards women and their spouses and their families when they are in this situation of experiencing this infant loss after pregnancy. And this happens because it's not just a medical health system issue. I think it's a societal issue that for too many years this has been a subject that we're not supposed to talk about. We're not supposed to even mention to our family and our closest friends. So subsequently, the programs in our hospitals are not there. You may be lucky enough to go to Sunnybrook, or you may be lucky enough to go to Mount Sinai, but in many of our hospitals there aren't the systems in place to help women get through pregnancy loss. In some cases, the systems aren't there to prevent pregnancy loss with a proper treatment and support for women. They would have fewer stillbirths and fewer miscarriages. And I know in talking to Dr. Kingdom, John Kingdom is the head of obstetrics and gynecology at Mount Sinai, he says if there are more investments made in healthcare to help women that are high risk and are in pregnancy, we wouldn't have as many stillbirths and miscarriages. Said there's a lack of coordination of the expertise. It's very hit and miss, and this is a doctor who's world-renowned in this area of maternal health. Dr. John Barrett at the Women and Babies Clinic at Sunnybrook has a program, it's called the Women and Babies Program, Mothers and Babies Program. But that program is not even funded within the hospital budget. It's funded by a donor. And within months, that program that helps high-risk pregnancies, the money from that donor is going to run out. So there's no money in the hospital budget to help mothers who would benefit by the expertise of Dr. John Barrett at Sunnybrook. There's an amazing group of volunteer mothers and women across Ontario called the PALE Network, Pregnancy and Infant Loss Network. They go all over the province counseling women, giving them support. They also train nurses, midwives. They try to train medical staff on how to deal with high-risk pregnancies. But the PALE Network has 2 paid staff for the whole province. 2 paid staff, and luckily they have volunteers. So this whole area of high-risk pregnancy and mothers that lose their babies have basically ad hoc charitable programs that are helping them. There isn't a comprehensive program out of the Ministry of Health to help counsel and support these women. And these women, as I said, every day this tragedy occurs, gut-wrenching tragedy. It occurs, and there's no systems in place in this problem. But you know, Ontario's not alone. Across Canada, these problems do not exist. In the United States, it's even worse. So there's a lot of resources in successful births, and there should be. But basically, there is a second-tier, second-class healthcare system that when it comes to mothers that are in high risk, and if they lose their babies, there is no counseling programs. Many of these mothers suffer from mental illness and anguish for years to come because there was no counseling. I know a neighbor of mine said that she had her next-door neighbor come to her for a whole year. She would come every night to cry at her kitchen table because she said her family wouldn't talk to her about her loss. So she didn't go to a counselor, she didn't go to her family, no doctor. She used to come and cry at her next-door neighbor's kitchen table trying to cope with this grief. That should not continue. There should be a province-wide system of counseling, province-wide system of support for high-risk pregnancy, and training. I know the volunteers in the PALE Network went to the midwifery program at Ryerson last week. The midwives of Ontario, they also support this Bill 141 because they only get about 1 session of training in high-risk pregnancy and infant loss in their whole program in midwifery. 1 session of training. What do they get in medical school? The RNs are supportive of this legislation because they know there needs to be more training. So that's what this bill would do. It would establish, it would direct the Ministry of Health to establish programs that are substantive in training medical personnel, in making sure there are province-wide systems that help mothers that go through pregnancy loss. Right now, there are not province-wide systems. And if you're in Northern Ontario and in the Indigenous communities, the rate of miscarriage and stillbirth is much higher than it is in the rest of Ontario. There are very few programs in those remote communities to help mothers. So we need a province-wide system of support and expertise. The good news is that, bravely, many mothers have come forward in great courage to talk about this tragedy. And I really want to pay special tribute to some of these real heroes that have come forward in recent weeks, because they were told you can't talk about this. They were told the government isn't interested, the media won't write about it, and your members of parliament won't listen to you. They said, don't bother. But they said, no, we are going to speak out. So they told their stories. Lisa Walter told her story about her poor son, Levi, who was lost. Amanda Oram, who has a blog telling about her stories, about her tragic loss of her 5-month-old son, Colle, who died after 5 months. Wendy Moosdale, who's a nurse practitioner out of Sunnybrook, who goes all over the province trying to train medical staff, trying to give support to mothers. She's out there, but with very few resources. Michelle LaFontaine, who's the volunteer chair, a bereaved mother herself of the PALE Network, who's doing incredible volunteer work in this field. Jamie McCleary. Jamie McCleary has come here, and she's come here at the press conference, and I don't think I've heard a more eloquent person in this legislature than Jamie McCleary. And if I could just read some of Jamie's heart-wrenching story. I mean, this is a woman that lost, a mother who's lost 2 children. And she says she's not going to stay silent anymore. So on her behalf, I'd like to read Jamie's deputation. Here's what Jamie McCleary said. I didn't think much of it at first when the ultrasound technician refused to speak to me at all. I thought it was a little odd that she asked me when I was expected to see my doctor next, and when she refused to let me see my son on the screen or to give me his picture to take home, I knew something was wrong. She wouldn't tell me anything, and I was terrified. I sobbed the entire drive home. She had to drive home by herself after being told this. Can you imagine? Because her husband was at work. All alone, trying desperately to get a hold of someone who could tell me what was happening with my baby. My doctor was unreachable, couldn't reach her doctor. My husband wasn't home from work yet, so I didn't know what to do. I tried for hours reaching my obstetrician. When my phone calls were finally returned, I was told to come in immediately. We were seated in the waiting room among 4 heavily pregnant women, waiting to find out what was wrong with our son. I could never have imagined that any medical professional, especially a female obstetrician who herself was expecting a baby, could have been so cold. She opened my file and said, quote, "So your baby's dead." That's what she said. An obstetrician, a medical doctor. She handed me a prescription to bring on labor, told me to go home with vague directions of problems to watch out for, and left the room. So this is Jamie McCleary, sent home again. My healthcare professionals simply do not know how to deliver compassionate care to families in our situation. I was clueless about what to expect from then on. I didn't realize I would be in labor for over 17 hours. I didn't realize it would be the most excruciating pain I had ever felt in my entire life. We didn't know we would need to make arrangements for someone to watch our daughter so that my husband could hold my hand instead of having to distract our 2-year-old in the basement when she was afraid of her mommy's cries of pain. I've never felt more alone than I did during that day, struggling to recover to deliver my son, alone in my bedroom. When he was born, I sat on the floor in my bathroom, holding him by my hand, not knowing if I should clean him up and look at him. I felt as though I was doing something wrong. I felt judged and confused, and in the end, I let my thoughts win and ignored every impulse in my body to really see my baby. That is the greatest regret of my life. There isn't a day that goes by that I think about that moment, wishing that I had been stronger, wishing that I had known that it was okay, that loving my son wasn't something to be ashamed of. And I know it's difficult to hear that, but that's Jamie's story. And that is not just one person. This happens by the thousands every year in Ontario. Women going through this living hell because there is no focused, comprehensive program or series of programs in our healthcare system to deal with this reality. It's a reality, and if you ask, I know in going through this in our own family and going through this and talking to many of my colleagues in the legislature even, many of you have said, it happened to my mother, it happened to my aunt, it happened to my wife. So in almost all of our families, these things have happened or are still happening. And that's why this bill today is not about pointing fingers or condemning the healthcare system or condemning healthcare professionals. It's, as the mothers say, it's time to break the silence. And they bravely and courageously, as I said, gone to meetings. They have come to Queen's Park to make deputations. They've set up their own Facebook page, websites, and they've gotten reaction from people across Canada. I've had people from British Columbia saying, we need something like this here in British Columbia. People from Nova Scotia. People from the States have saying, we need something like Bill 141 here. And thank God you broke the silence, that you spoke out. That's what these brave women have done. And on their behalf, I'm so glad to have done this. And we do have great medical expertise. And because of the bravery of these women and the courage to speak out, there is hope that this is going to be finally given the attention it deserves. And we've got, again, great nurse practitioners like Wendy Mosdale. We've got great volunteers out of the PALE network. We've got great brave mothers like Liza and Amanda. And we've got doctors like Dr. Barrett at Sunnybrook, who within 3 days came up with a proposal to say, listen, if your government wants to do something, here's what to do. So we know what has to be done. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to have a comprehensive program that needs funding, that needs resources, and we have to support these mothers as a society. It's something we should talk about. It's not easy, believe me, it's not easy when this happens, as you all know. But if we don't talk about it, nothing's going to be done. We're going to continue to have this system which is at best piecemeal in dealing with these precious little ones and the mothers and their families who suffer and grieve for months to come. So we've got, again, the willingness of doctors to cooperate. We've got the willingness of these volunteers. We know we have the Ontario Nurses Association, the midwifery organizations. They will all come together, but they can't do it unless there is a program within the Ministry of Health to put some resources towards pregnancy and infant death and infant loss. Right now, there is, as I said, a real gap. There's a real, as I said, a complete wall of silence where they're told, again, as I said, the mothers say, oh, well, bad luck, you can have more, you're still young, go ahead. That is not the way to help these mothers and families. You need professional counseling. You need funded counseling programs. You need doctors that are trained. You need to ask your local hospital. I ask all of you here, go to your hospital in Sudbury, ask them if they've got a program for high-risk pregnancy and women that suffer infant loss. Ask them at your hospital in Sudbury. Ask them in Vaughan if your hospital has it. Ask in Ottawa if they've got these programs. You'll see it's hit and miss. It's ad hoc. It's sometimes you've got a brave doctor and a midwife and maybe a nurse who has put together a program with a volunteer. That is not good enough. And I urge all of you, on the behalf of these mothers and children, to ask at your local hospital, see what they got there. And I'd like to see what you give it to me back. I really would like to help. And maybe together we can get this silence broken. And again, I want to thank the Minister of Health, Minister Hoskins, who said, listen, I think it's time we do this. And he's a medical doctor. He said, yes, there are huge gaps. Dr. Kingham said, you know, as much as all these advances in healthcare in Canada and Ontario, this is an area that's not improving. Despite all the advancement in science, it's not improving. The number of stillbirths is not declining. So I think there's great hope because of the courage of these mothers especially, and their husbands, their families are volunteers. You know, like I just mentioned, Lynn Davis came all the way from London by bus here today, and she came by train the other day just to attend a meeting. These are the kinds of volunteers we've got in all of our communities that are helping these mothers, but they're doing it on a dime and on their own. They should be given the support so women like Lynn Davies could do some counseling, because now they have to turn people away. They don't have enough counselors. So again, I want to thank my daughter Bianca, especially, who has encouraged me to do this, and all of you for listening.